there's a third kind of purpose that I and others identified, and I call that transcendental purpose. And I call it transcendental because, one, it goes beyond and includes our biological purpose and our transformational purpose. So it kind of builds on that. And it's a collective term for all these other words that people used for purpose or use for purpose. And one thing that's really exciting to me, and I think is fantastic news for the future of humanity, is that people at any level of consciousness development can awaken to live their transcendental purpose. So you don't need to be at a high level of consciousness, like integral or transpersonal or higher, and you also don't need to be very spiritually evolved in order to get in touch and to live your transcendental purpose. And one indicator for that is that, very loosely speaking, people at different levels of consciousness have given this purpose that goes beyond the biological and transformational purpose different names. So they call it spirit's purpose, or some people call it unique purpose, or higher or God's purpose, or real or true purpose, or soul's purpose, or evolutionary purpose, or authentic purpose, or universe's purpose. You probably have heard all, or at least some of these words be put in front of the word purpose, and maybe I miss a few. Maybe there are a few more words that people use to identify this which goes beyond the biological purpose and the transformational purpose. And then as I started to investigate it more and read some books, and specifically Andrew Cohen's book, Evolutionary Enlightenment, and being from Germany and feeling a lot of shame and pain around the Holocaust, even though I was born 12 years after World War II, one thing that really bothered me about a lot of these purpose teachings is that they don't have some moral checkpoints in it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. But for me, in what I'm proposing is that a transcendental purpose always creates more goodness, truth, beauty, and functionality, and is in service of the biological purpose of all living things and the well-being of others. Because as we will see in a moment, sometimes people just say, oh, follow your bliss or do what makes you feel alive, etc., etc. And that can, be true for people who don't have the best intention or actually do real harm to others. And they can feel very passionate about something and feel, that this is really something that the world needs. And so we need, from my opinion, these checkpoints here: goodness, truth, beauty, and functionality. And as I was learning about purpose and reading books, I came across this very interesting book, at least to me, called The Complexity of Greatness, Beyond Talent and Practice, edited by Scott Barry Kaufman, a very interesting psychologist. He has a very interesting podcast if you want to check him out. And what the scientists that contributed to this book were verifying was this notion, mainly put forward by Daniel Goleman in a book, is that you can achieve greatness in any area if you only practice 10,000 hours. So you can become a chess champion or a top violinist or a baseball or soccer player or a mathematician or a businessman or a therapist, and you can be in the top 10, so to speak, right? Be one of the world champions if you just put in 10,000 hours of practice. So this idea that is often told American children specifically, you can become everything you want. You can become anything you want if you just practice enough, if you put enough effort into it. And there was even an article in the New York Times 2 days ago that they think our brains may actually have reached a certain capacity of cramming, of putting more and more information into it. But it was just some preliminary stuff. Anyway, these people, these researchers questioned that, and they found out that there are some people, they practice 10,000 hours, let's say singing or playing chess, and they're still mediocre. They're not getting anywhere. And there are other people who practice much less, and they're already exceptional. And then they ask themselves, well, why are some children drawn early on to, let's say, music or sports or reading, or show certain tendencies that of interest, right? Or we see certain talents. We would say, oh, you have a talent for bike riding or for whatever, right? And what they came up with is almost logically that we're genetically predispositioned for certain talents. And that really, really blew my mind. I mean, just this like, whoa, we're genetically predispositioned for talents. How the hell did that happen? And so, of course, doing the work that I do and having had this experience as a single father since 2002, so going almost on 20 years now, and was dating a lot, and having read a lot of dating profiles, I thought, that's interesting, because, when our ancestors, like the Neanderthals and other sapiens that have long been extinguished from the world, initially they were just like other animals, and their sexual selection was completely based on their ability basically to survive and to defend and to find food, and which just required strength in males, and the same as today, reproductive capabilities in females. But when these some early humans became self-conscious and developed language and the ability to create simple tools and form tribes and things like that, all of a sudden just being the strongest and the most brutal guy didn't mean that you're the best protector and provider, because as intelligence developed, the smarter guys could outsmart the not so intelligent guys. And maybe that's one reason why some other sapiens like the Neanderthals and if you study that, there were all kinds of different species that got extinct. Only we Homo sapiens survived, and there are some people who think that we just killed off the other ones. And that had probably nothing to do with our strength, but with our intelligence. And so what happened then is that females, of course, now no longer just one of the strongest and the tallest and the best looking guys. In addition, they also selected for the brain, right? That the brain of man became of interest. And what provided survival benefits for females and their children was to get together with guys who, in addition of good looks, were also smart, cognitively intelligent, were creative, could make stuff but also entertain them, make cave paintings and figurines and ornaments and necklaces or whatever, and design things. Men who were kind to their female partners and maybe to other people around them of their tribe, of course still aggressive towards others, and also who were practical, who could create, make fire and use weapons and had good kinesthetic skills, not too left hand, but can fix things around the house. And to this day, when we men read dating profiles, if you're single and on the internet, you can almost in every dating profile you can read, I want to have a good-looking guy who is tall and has hair and muscles for some women and things like that, and right, that's not enough, and who's intelligent, who can make me laugh, who is creative, who's interesting, who's kind, right, who understands my feeling, is in touch with the woman's feeling, doesn't have any baggage and is not angry, and who can fix things around the house. This is almost a cross, read this. To this day, I have to read a profile where I would read like, I want to have a short, overweight guy who's stupid, boring, rude, and has two left hands, right? And is really good at laying around on the couch. I never ever read something like that in a profile. And so since this went on now for probably a good 3, 4, 500,000 years, we're not really sure how old we Homo sapiens are and when this consciousness emerged, but definitely over 200,000 years. And I'm saying that because last Tuesday we watched the movie A Quest for Fire, and when they made this movie 40 years ago, they thought the setting that they showed was 80,000 years ago, but now we know that it was over 200,000 years ago when these very early humans lived, and probably even further back. We looked it up. Fire was actually harnessed and used by early humans up to 1 million years ago. Anyway, we live now, and this sexual selection for what some women call sapiosexual or sapiosexual, right, which means they love the brain of man in addition to just their good looks. That then, through the process of meiosis, if you haven't paid attention in biology class, really gets handed down through the stem cells to the cells that make sperms and eggs, right? Get handed down from generation to generation through the process of meiosis, which means we still have all the genetic material in us from our earliest genetic ancestors and certainly our human ancestors. And this is relatively complex, and I'm not going to go into it, but you can have had someone with certain talents 5 or 10 or 20 generations back, and all of a sudden, these particular talents get activated in you, and then you're born with these talents. And so here are the 4 talents, and not everyone has the same predisposition for talent. And I just used the metaphor of a mountain here to begin with. Right? So this person here, just when they're conceived, they inherit, like this person, his empathy talent or her empathy talent not very high, right? More a little hill. And then cognitive intelligence, talent for cognitive intelligence, extremely high here, Mount Everest. And then creativity, kind of mediocre, or not mediocre, but so like a little bit above average maybe. And then kinesthetic functioning, relatively high. Right? So we're all born with different predispositions, and some people, of course, who are very unfortunate, it's extremely low. And then after birth and, pretty much through our life afterwards, we have then the ability to develop the skills to enact these talents. So let's say you have a mathematical talent or cognitive intelligence with some predisposition for mathematics, but there is nobody there who teaches you math, then it's much harder to express that talent than if you're surrounded by people who recognize your talent and then allow you and support you in developing that skill, which was the case for Gauss, for example, the famous German mathematician. A teacher early on recognized his mathematical talent, or for Mozart, where his father recognized his musical talent, etc., etc. So we often see, not in all cases, that all people who then really achieve greatness, they also had a lot of support early on in their life, or were so drawn to enacting their talent and building the skills that they just did it against all odds. And so I found that really, really fascinating. And so here's a bit of very coarsely how this process happens, because it is important that even though you're born, as I already said, with the predisposition for certain talents, you need brain development that is conducive, that you later can build the skill, and this happens to what's called experience expectant learning. Your brain, after you are born, or even before you're born, is like a sponge, and it expects certain stimuli and certain experiences in order to learn, to see and to hear and to have emotional control and to speak and to walk and things like that. So your brain is really expecting from birth in certain time windows, as we see here on the screen, to be exposed to this experience expectant learning. It expects to learn this. And this is then followed by experience dependent learning. So that's the learning that is culturally and socially dependent. Like our brain doesn't expect you to learn to play chess or to play piano or to ride a bicycle, right? That is just something that sort of, so to speak, gets crammed into the brain depending on what your environment deems necessary for you to learn, or a second language or something like that. And then when you practice a lot certain skills, then certain neuronal connections in your brain get myelated. It's called, they get these myelin sheaths. And again, there was, until a few years ago, people talked about muscle memory, right? When we could do something automatically without thinking, they thought that the memory, the ability to, let's say, drive a stick shift or play the piano or speak a language was basically in the muscles. Well, speaking a language, not, but any kind of, tying a shoe and things like that, and walking, riding a bicycle, that memory to how to do that would be stored in the muscles. And then they found out, no, that's the synapses that are myelated, and they fire up to 3,000 times faster than non-myelated synaptic connections. And so this is what we do when we practice through repetition. These connections that are used a lot, they get myelated, and then we have this talent that then often looks to others like, how the hell does this person do that, right? There's also something, kind of as a side note, what is called synaptic pruning. That's a little bit like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And also genetically, some of the early synaptic formations that are created in the brain, as we see here, at about 2 years, there's like the brain is just full with all these synaptic connections, and some of them are no longer necessary, and so they get pruned away. And then later, again, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that goes on till about age 20 or 21, they think now. And so this is really vital that early on in your life you develop some skills to express your talents. It becomes harder to do that later, and that's bad news for the transcendental purpose, right? If you miss these windows of developing capacities and skills while your brain is still more plastic, right? This is where we talk about neuroplasticity and things like that, which goes on into older life, but it diminishes as we move forward. And so if you had the ability to develop skills that are based on your natural talents, then you may be able to feel into and see, well, am I leaning more towards creating beauty, right? Designing beautiful things, or maybe you're an artist, a musician, you can be an architect, a set designer, makeup, there's many things where people create beauty in the world, right? Or are you somebody who's more drawn towards creating functioning things, stuff that works, right? And that can be social, political, can be a functional body, can be a functional system, a functional mousetrap, whatever, right? You're more towards practical, functional things, or you have very good kinesthetic abilities. You're a good dancer, you're a good person in sports or things like that. And then, or you may be more drawn to truth. So you may be a teacher, a scientist, a journalist. You're just very interested in truth, in a philosopher. Or you're very interested in goodness. So you may be an activist or a moral philosopher or just a doer-gooder in the world, right? You're very sensitive when people suffer. Maybe you work for animal rights or something like that. So everyone can kind of feel, when I went to school and if I look back at my life, maybe I was leaning to one or two of these very broad expressions of talent and other things I'm not so good at. Like, for example, I can barely draw a stick man. Like I'm horrible with drawing, I'm horrible with dancing. I know the things that I'm horrible at, and I also, we're often more aware of what we're not so good at than acknowledging what we're good at. And that's sometimes also a little unfortunate that our society sometimes asks us to focus on the things that we're not so good at to compensate somehow instead of allowing us to focus on the things that were already good. It's maybe a little bit more in Germany. When I grew up, it was that way than it was in America, where you have more flexibility, as I noticed when my kids went to school, that they were more furthering the talents of the children and not just trying to get everyone good at many, many things that they just had no talents for. And then, that may then lead to all these different expressions, and we'll look at it in a moment a little further. So this is how this basically works. And one other consequence that it has, that I think I never saw anyone mentioning that, why do we have these 4 dimensions of our being and then related to these different disciplines of aesthetics and science and morals and functioning, right? And Immanuel Kant, he wrote 3 big books, 3 critiques about knowledge and aesthetics and morals, and then the 4th one was missing at the time, right? Why did these 4 dimensions of being that Plato recognized 3 of, the good, the true, the beautiful, how did they emerge in the first place? And now we know. I mean, we here know, and not many people, if any people, have connected that to the sexual selection process, but that's the only explanation why this emerged in humans and why we became so successful. It's all the achievement of females being smart enough to choosing guys who are cognitively smart, empathetic, good, and creative and practical. And here we are, right, living in this world of these 4 dimensions that every philosopher from Plato on to this day has integrated in their philosophies.